A Play of Giants. By Wole Soyinka. A gripping and fantasic account of how absolute political power gives birth to fascism. Pitched in the bitter years after independence of Africa. The play brings together three great dictators of Africa. Ruthless in their demonstration of power. Boasts of their glory and how the innocents lie grovelling at their mercy. However, Soyinka shows that there is an end to totalitarianism. The end of the play is absolutely marvelously penned. It shows that the face of oppression. The state is always the same. Every time and everywhere. There is no face of power. It is flowing everywhere. Mr. Soyinka. The Nigerian playwright, poet, novelist and essayist, spares no one in this farcical fantasy about African dictators at loose in New York. The first, second and third worlds, Eastern and Western divisions, are all mowed down in the relentless comic barrage, before anyone grabs the next train to New Haven. However, an important caveat must be added. If Mr. Soyinka is arguably Africa's foremost literary renaissance man, he does not seem particularly gifted as a director of comedy. He has staged a play of giants himself, with little flair and a mostly lackluster cast. The production, unlike the text, can appear inert. One leaves the Yale rep feeling that the play is a time bomb that, while alive and ticking, has yet to be detonated. The evening's premise is as wicked as can be. Mr. Soyinka has imagined that four power-crazed life presidents have gathered at the Bugaroo Embassy to the United Nations to sit for a statuary group portrait being crafted by a sculptor, imported from Madame Tussauds London waxworks. The host of this absurd conclave is the Bugaran dictator, Field Marshal Kamini, with Bugra and Kamini proving transparent stand-ins for Uganda and its former strongman, Idi Amin. The remaining three giants on display are similarly undisguised caricatures of past and present real-life tyrants who have variously terrorized and looted the Central African Republic. Jean-Bedel Bokassa, Zaire, Mobutu Sese Seko, and Equatorial Guinea, Nuema Mesi Bayoto. But it is Big Daddy Kamini, played by Roger Robinson, who dominates. At once a mischievous child and a brutal psychopath, Kamini is Amin down to his bizarre declarations of love for other world leaders. If Fidel Castro is a woman, I will marry him. And his weird paranoid explosions. Told by Bugra's chief banker that his country's indiscriminately minted currency is as worthless as toilet paper. Kamini accuses the man of being in conspiratorial cahoots with the World Bank and has his head smashed into a toilet in full view of the embassy retinue and the audience. Kamini also whimsically insists that the United Nations give permanent display to the forthcoming statues, a request that ultimately sparks a violent international contretemps that is the fulcrum of the play's plot. This work could only have been written by an African such as Mr. Soyinka, who spent nearly 2 years in solitary confinement on trumped-up charges during the Nigerian Civil War of the 1960s. The anger in A Play of Giants is bottomless, yet the author miraculously transmutes it into gallows humor. One of the play's giants rationalizes a massacre of his country's supposedly subversive schoolchildren by calmly arguing, better the loss of a few children than the poisoning of their growth by the horror of rebellion. This logic is grotesquely funny in itself, but it is then topped by Kamini's loony, nonsensical response. All great men love children, like Hitler. I see photographs of him kissing children, like me. One doesn't know whether to laugh or scream. Even more impressive is Mr. Soyinka's even-handed political analysis. Kamini travels with a homegrown academic and speechwriter who constantly explains away aberrations in African leadership as being the product of colonialism's economic and historical conditions. The playwright will have none of such apologist sentiments, and neither will he allow Kamini to get away with branding his critics as racists. To Mr. Soyinka, megalomania is a psychosis, sexual and narcotic in its symptoms, that transcends race, political creed or historical circumstances. Khomeini and his cohorts may exploit the rhetoric of black liberation and anti-imperialism to justify their mass murders and tortures, but there is no mistaking these leaders for anything other than deranged thugs. Just the same, the author demands that the rest of the world accept responsibility for complicity in what has happened, and what still happens. In the play's published introduction, Mr. Soyinka reminds us that Armenia was sustained in power at various periods by nations as varied as the United States and the Soviet Union, Great Britain and Libya, as well as by the cheerleaders among the intelligentsia of the African continent and the Black Caucasus of the United States. The playwright accordingly provides an ecumenical, clownish parade of such Khomeini sympathizers on stage, among them, American and Soviet diplomats, a leftist Scandinavian journalist and a black American mayor. In Mr. Soyinka's view, these representative power brokers are all guilty of ignoring the dictators' human rights abuses when it suits their geopolitical or ideological ends. Not until Khomeini's excesses threaten to undermine or embarrass his patron's self-interests is he at last shunned by the left and right, blacks and whites. The only character of integrity on stage is the sculptor, who might well represent the playwright. In the evening's final image, the artist, severely wounded but undaunted, continues to work as bullets and explosions rock the embassy. Fans of Mr. Soyinka's best-known work in the United States, his bucolic 1981 memoir, The Years of Childhood, may be stunned by this work's savage tone. But with the principal and essential exception of Mr. Robinson's alternately buffoonish and blood-curdling Khomeini, that tone is perfunctorily served here. Of the 19 supporting players, only Ray Rania's Professor and Christopher Noth's Sculptor leave firm impressions. The staging, which should have the manic intensity of Dr. Strangelove, too often proves sedentary and static. A play of giants is a sleeping giant of satirical theatre that another production could, and, in good conscience, must, wake up. End of the review. Thank you.